Good morning, everybody. Good morning. This is Kristin Gauldin with Hand2mind. We are almost at 11 o'clock. Oh, we're right at 11 o'clock. So we should go ahead and get started. Let me just very quickly give you a face. Hopefully this will work. There we go. Hello. Hopefully you can see me. I am going to take you through Makerspace today. So we're going to talk a little bit about, just general best practices for Makerspace, how you can implement Makerspace maybe in a distance learning or e-learning. And then I'm going to walk you through our Makerspace carts and give you an overview of those and what we have included in them. But before we get started, I am going to go over a couple of just, housekeeping logistics. I will turn the webcam off here in just a second, and then I'll turn it back on at the end when we do live Q&A. So please send your questions. I'm going to show you the attendee panel here so that you can see how to send questions to us. So this is what your participation panel looks like, and you have a box that says questions. That's a little bit blurry, but if you have questions or comments or you're having trouble with something, please put them there. I do have somebody on that will be able to help you and address any immediate concerns, but we will do the live Q&A at the end, so I encourage you to ask questions so that we can answer them towards the end of the webinar. I will address recording and certificate at the end as well, and we'll do the giveaway. So if you're still here at the end, you might possibly win a set of test cards for the Makerspace cart. So hopefully everybody is fully connected and we can go ahead and get started. So let me just give you a little bit of background on, Hand2mind. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Hand2mind, but we are a supplemental provider of hands-on resources for the classroom. So everything that we do and have is centered around students, using hands-on materials, very kinesthetic learning. And we're also focused on closing the gaps that are ever present with core curriculum. I'm a firm believer as a former teacher that it doesn't matter what program you use, inevitably there are going to be gaps in something because everybody has a different classroom with different needs, and there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. So we're really devoted to offering the solutions that fill those gaps. And we certainly spend a lot of time making sure that our products are classroom tested and teacher tested and used on students before going to market and are going to be worthwhile. So that's who Hand2mind is. We really focus on hands-on learning because it works. One of the things that I think is the most important in learning for students is the focus on retention, right? We know that if they don't retain the information that we are giving to them or teaching them, that they're going to continue to struggle as they move on from grade level to grade level and try to build upon really a foundation that is unstable. So hands-on learning drastically increases the retention when students are learning. So it goes from about 20%, which is what they're taking in, which is really unbelievable, in a passive learning environment, to 75% in an active learning environment when they're given an opportunity to immediately practice what they've just learned. It quadruples. So this is why we are so committed to providing hands-on resources for students, because we know that it's effective. So Makerspace carts, some of you may have attended our previous Makerspace webinars. We had, the nerdy teacher, Nick, joined us and talked about Makerspace and the importance of project-based learning. We've talked about, a lot of different topics around Makerspace. This is going to more specifically focus on our Makerspace, but I'm also going to talk about, ways that you can get started, why it's important for the students, how you can implement, again, in, an unsure environment where we may be teaching remotely for part of the time. But what is Makerspace cart? So if we sort of define that, Maker is the open-ended exploration that fosters creativity and innovation with the engineering design process. The space is really just giving students a designated area that allows them to design, to build, to tinker, using a variety of STEM materials. And then the cart is really the fully loaded turnkey mobile station that has all of the activities and the materials included that allow students to do all of the creating and the designing and the tinkering. So there are some key elements that every makerspace really should have. So whether this is ours or somebody else's, or you're creating your own, every makerspace should have all of these things. So the first would be hands-on activities. Even if you have some digital integration, maybe you're doing coding or you have devices that are part of your makerspace, students should still be engaged in some kind of hands-on fabrication, because that's a really key element of a makerspace, is that they're manipulating and designing, using materials hands-on. There are things out there now that integrate, you could certainly integrate digital with hands-on, and that works together somehow in an activity. They also should have student ownership over the creative process, and we're going to talk about this one in more detail, because while I believe students should have complete ownership over the creative process, the reality is that in order to make Makerspace, practical, they still have to have some guiding principles, right? They have to have an objective, they have to have a goal, and they have to sort of have some guiding questions that will allow them to, go through the creative process in a manner that's going to reach the end goal, whatever that may be, whatever it is that they're supposed to be creating. It also should be a differentiated space so that they can sit, they can stand, they can move around. Some schools have the makerspace in their library. Some have a makerspace that's moving from classroom to classroom. Some have a completely devoted room for makerspace. But just giving students enough room to move around and really be able to test things and build things with the space is important for them to have. The project should also go beyond engineering. Engineering is really important, and we know that the science and engineering practices are, one of the pillars of sort of next generation science, but the project should not just be centered around engineering. So there should be some integration outside, and they should enrich your curriculum to a certain degree, right? So making sure that they are extending and giving students opportunity to create and build, but also reinforcing something that you're doing in your core curriculum, and that just makes it relevant. So there's a lot of reasons why Makerspace is a great resource or a great, solution for your classroom, and these are some of them. So first, it empowers student curiosity and creativity. We tend to be very focused on expectations, particularly in, I think, the elementary grades, where we have a lot of things that we're covering and a lot of expectations and a lot of testing and things like that. And sometimes there's not always the opportunity to allow students to be as creative as we want them to be, because we simply don't have enough time. So this really gives a relevant, applicable way for students to be creative, but also do something that's going to tie into your core curriculum in some manner. And it doesn't have to just be STEM, although that is definitely the most obvious integration. It increases retention because they're manipulating objects and they're building and they're participating in the hands-on learning. It's going to increase their understanding. So hands-on is stimulating both sides of the brain, right? So when we're stimulating both sides of the brain, that is allowing the brain to form more solid connections, which are increasing the retention. It also happens to actively engage students. They enjoy building. They, enjoy working with their peers and doing so. So it's keeping their interest. They're not easily bored. It's also fostering independent creative problem solving, because you're giving them a challenge or a task that they are really thinking through themselves or with their group, again, with guiding principles, but they're figuring out ways to solve whatever the problem is, or to complete the challenge or task without the explicit guidance of a teacher. It is encouraging collaboration among their peers. I think this one's really important, and we're going to talk about that with social emotional learning in a minute. It also is self-directed. It builds confidence and personal skills and knowledge. We know that when students are successful, they build confidence. And one of the things about Makerspace is that Makerspace isn't just about the design. it's also about their building personal skills and being able to really interact with their peers and figure out ways to communicate and figure out ways to collaborate. So, because we're putting an emphasis on the process and how they're working through the design process instead of, one right or wrong outcome, they are doing it right because there is no one right way. It's also adaptive and inclusive for all learning styles. I'm getting an odd message, so I'm hoping that GoToWebinar is not experiencing some kind of a connection issue. So if it is cutting out for any reason, hang in there. I'm not sure what this message is, but we're going to keep going. Okay, so how do you start planning your space? Again, there's a lot of different ways to execute a makerspace and to incorporate a makerspace into the instruction. These are just some things to think about as you get started, especially if you're designing your own makerspace. So seeking input is really important. Do you have teachers in your network that have done this and done this well that you can tap into to see what worked, what didn't work? There's a lot of really great teachers who have documented and shared their experience with Makerspace online. Google is a fabulous thing. So if you Google that, there's several examples that pop up and show, what worked well, what didn't work well, what would they do differently, what are some tips for other teachers that are looking to do the same thing. Map out your space. What does that look like? Where is it going to be? Make it mobile. It's definitely, important that it is mobile and that you can move it to, an outdoor space if you need to, or to a different room if you need to. Making it flexible. So the flexibility is more efficiency, I think, having maybe a table that has a whiteboard on the back, or, having space that can be converted into something else, like maybe something can fold up and be put away so that students have more space if they're not using it, like maybe a table that folds up, that kind of flexibility. Considering power, while power can be kind of a scary thing for us when we're thinking about elementary students, right? We don't necessarily want to hand them power tools, but we definitely want to make sure that if they can use the tools that we have power for them. And my screen is lagging, so just bear with me. Let me try to stop and share again. I'm not sure. Okay, I'm going to flip over. I'm going to try some troubleshooting on my end and see if I can get it to work. Okay, I think I got it. Okay, you can see my screen now. Fixed it. We have to love technology. It's very, very effective, but sometimes it just doesn't want to work. So hopefully you got that. So I'm going to start at the beginning of this again, just to make sure that we didn't miss anything. So seeking input, mapping out your space, making it mobile, making it flexible, considering power, and maybe older, upper elementary, they're probably going to, use power more. You might allow them to use tools that you wouldn't allow, K2 students to use. It just kind of depends. But even if they have to bring their computer, do they have a place to plug it in if their battery's low? Those kind of things. Consider storage. Are you going to keep the makerspace out all the time? Do you want to be able to put it away? Do you have a dedicated makerspace area? Or are you, using that space for other things at different times? And then guidelines and goals. Just making sure that, there are guidelines in place for best practices. Our makerspace does include some tips, so it definitely is helpful to see that and some structure for students to a certain degree, not too much, but then also having goals. What are the overarching goals of a makerspace, no matter what project or task or design that students are being asked to tackle? And then this is a quote from Nick, who actually did a couple of webinars previously for us. Design your space around the needs of your students and staff, and you will find it packed and messy on a regular basis. He's a firm believer in the freedom of students' creativity and really getting in there and just designing and not worrying about the extra variables. These are sort of looking at it a little bit differently, but the 5 S's of a successful makerspace are the space itself, the stuff. So the stuff would be the materials. We have a product called STEM bins. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. So this is from Brooke Brown. Just having a variety, and we'll talk about that. The schedule, how are you going to integrate Makerspace into your schedule? Are you going to have a Makerspace station as a center? Are you going to allow, students to go to the Makerspace on specific days or at specific times? Those things to consider. The structure, designing teacher-led, open-ended exploration, just making sure, again, that there's some guiding principles in a Makerspace activity, all of them, to a certain degree. It can't be too open to be, so that it's not practical. And then self-direction, putting a lot of emphasis on student choice and self-directed learning. The great thing about Makerspace in terms of learning styles is that it's really going to accommodate all of them, because even if you have students that maybe are more visual, that's a part of Makerspace. Those that are more auditory, it definitely can be something that is integrated more. It's not just about the hands-on, it's really going to accommodate all learners. I wanted to put this in here because I think it's helpful for you all to, look at the options for funding, because it's always a hurdle when we're trying to obtain new resources for the classroom. So there are a lot of grants out there. There are a lot of grants that are specific to Makerspace and STEM. Honestly, there seem to be more than any other area. So check them out, because they are there, and there's always some that are active. Some of them are national, some of them are regional. Connect with your PTA. Is there anything that your PTA can do to help you with either securing the materials or securing the funding? Is there a fundraiser? Make a donation wish list. I think sometimes, people surprise us and are very generous in their donations, especially for something like a Makerspace, and what the intention is. Local businesses and services can help. They are often willing to donate materials. Maybe they're even willing to donate their discarded materials. Maybe they are an electronics store that gets rid of unused electronics, or they have a ton of extra cardboard or styrofoam or whatever it may be. They have an abundance of materials, and often they end up being waste, and they'd be more than happy to donate them. Start a direct fundraising campaign. I have seen several direct fundraising campaigns. There's a lot of different organizations out there. Donors Choose is one that we work with. You can do a crowdfunding. I donated to one last week for somebody who was trying to get headsets for all of the students in the classroom. So, there's always something that is out there for teachers who are doing their own direct fundraising. And then social media groups. I think there are many social media groups that have popped up on different topics. Hands-on learning, Makerspace definitely is one. And they often have other avenues to secure funding if you're stuck or finding, you don't have an option. But there are many things that you can tap into to get started, even if it's not all of it. If it gets you partial funding, it's still worth it. So what would we consider to be essential simple materials? This doesn't have to be overly complex. There are a lot of very ordinary, materials that make the best materials to use for many, many projects. So they're very versatile. Cardboard is one of those. You want as much cardboard as you can get. Cardboard of different shapes, cardboard of different sizes. They will use cardboard in almost every single design challenge. Basic tools, screwdrivers, wire cutters, pliers. Then we also want to teach the safety of the basic tools, right? But they may need a hammer, or they may need a pliers or a wire cutter, especially if they're doing something with circuits. They would need a wire cutter. So just sort of things to consider. Glue, hot glue, glue sticks. Hot glue is definitely a must in the upper grades. You could always, use the hot glue gun as the teacher for the students in the lower grades and still, get them used to using it. Plastic bottles, jar containers, baby food jars, soda bottles, that kind of thing. Pool noodles. This one was actually one I had not heard before, and I was like, because they can be cut into a lot of different shapes and they're very sturdy. So I thought that was very interesting and worth sharing. Copper wire, wooden dowels, yarn, some sort of building material, Legos, Connects, magnet tiles, you name it, some sort of building material that will allow them to create something that they need specifically, that's larger. Duct tape is another necessary item to have. Broken technology for parts, again, local businesses, and then art and coloring supplies. They also are going to need markers and crayons and tape, and maybe they need paint and paintbrushes and that kind of thing. So keep the materials essential and simple. Are they materials that they can use to complete a variety of different projects? Then they're worth having in the space. Makerspace at home. Okay, so I'm going to touch on this because I think it's important because it's a very real possibility, and we're not quite sure at this point what the fall will bring. So how in the world would we incorporate a makerspace at home? Number one, I think we have to think about the fact that most households have materials that work. They have Legos, they have art supplies, they probably have paper. Dad might have tools in the garage, they might have straws, fabric. They probably have common goods around the house. I always think about the students that may not and want things to be accessible and equitable. So I would probably err on the side of planning ahead and creating take-home bins. If there was a scenario in which we were out of school for any length of time or we're doing a rotating schedule, that doesn't mean that they can't do makerspace. I just have to plan for that. So a take-home bin might be a shoebox that has basic building and craft materials that is each individual student. I would also include a set of individual challenge cards in each box so that they are, like the materials that are in the box are going to support the challenge cards, right? They could use them for the challenge cards that they have. And then, of course, establishing a protocol for makerspace at home. So let's look at this. I want to give you kind of a visual to show you what I would do with this. So if I had a classroom of 24 students, I would get 24 shoe boxes. Maybe they all have to donate one. I'm not sure where I'd get them, but I would get them. Or 24 plastic bins, those, totes, Rubbermaid totes. And maybe I have 4 different bins. So these are just examples of different challenges I could put in there. So the maker bin one might be building a catapult, a greenhouse, soda bottle airplane. So they each have different challenges. But every bin would have several students. So the first one, John, Sally, Jose, and Megan, when I handed out the bins to take home, those 4 would end up with the same bin. Why? Well, because if they're going to be completing makerspace at home, giving them the same materials and the same challenges as several other students in the classroom gives them a system of support, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that they're completing the activities together. It's more about having somebody to tap into, to ask questions, or to meet with once a week as they're building their own individual design. It definitely can work. We just have to make sure that they have the access to the materials and that it is organized in a manner that's on an individual student by student basis instead of in a group format where they're sharing things, because that's much harder in an e-learning format. So there would also be remote learning protocol for a makerspace, right? So just to give them an expectation of what to expect. I personally, and this is up for interpretation, this is just what I would do. I would create a Padlet wall for each group. So every group would have a Padlet wall with, maybe I would add some guiding questions on that Padlet wall, but then they would have a link to be able to talk to each other as well. So like if one of them was stuck on something, the other student could respond to that, who maybe was stuck on it the day before but got over it. They provide guiding questions. You could require a post on the Padlet wall at a certain point. It doesn't have to be daily, but maybe they're showing you a progress picture, or they're putting something on the post that is documenting their design. Weekly meeting with the teacher could work. And, again, maybe it's a project that's over the course of a month. It doesn't necessarily have to be weekly, but it's just a connection point with the teacher in which all students who have the same bin are meeting to discuss, their challenges or share their success. Just a way to ensure that there's some collaboration among students in a remote learning environment. And again, grouping serves as a system of support for projects being completed at home individually. You could even do a final project showcase via web meeting with the teacher, and each student would individually present their project, and the teacher would evaluate each individual student project based on the showcase and the work throughout. So this is just one example of how you could integrate and implement Makerspace into an e-learning environment. It's definitely a possibility. It just sort of is a little bit thinking outside the box, right? So now I'm going to shift to our Makerspace carts, because these are excellent options for Makerspace stations in your classroom. And we have a couple of different options, and we have challenges and task cards that are included with these, and an abundance of material. So what it essentially does is cuts out the need to do all of the planning, gather all of the materials, figure out how to store it. It cuts all of that out. So we have a Makerspace STEM lab cart, and we have a classroom cart. The classroom cart is a smaller cart. It has over 70 building and craft materials. There are 36 task cards, and the STEM lab cart has 72 task cards and over 95 building and craft materials. We're going to look at these individually, but it's easy organized. There's a guide that's included that I'll show you that kind of lays out where you would put everything, and how quickly and easily it is to access something. Like small materials are organized with an insert, so it's just super user friendly. We do have these available in different bands. So the STEM lab cart, we have a K5 and we have a 6-8. The classroom cart is available in a K2 and a 3-5 configuration. So they are a more focused band. So one of the things that is really important, I touched on this earlier, is the engineering design. It should go beyond this, and the task cards that I'm going to show you do. But the engineering design process also serves as the guide, right? For a student, this is essentially what they should be working through in their head when they are designing. What's the problem? They have to identify what the problem is first. If they're designing a better recycle bin for the classroom, then the problem is that they don't have one, or the one that they have is too small, or something like that. They have to, sort of lay out ways to solve. They really have to then build the prototype. They have to test it. Does it work? Does it do what it was intended to do? If it doesn't, they have to go back and think about it and reevaluate, replan, and then try it out again. And hopefully the second time it works. It may not. Then they go through the process again. So it just gives students the guiding principles for design. And what should they be working through? What should they be asking themselves or identifying as they are creating something? When students are doing this, we are absolutely helping them develop social emotional skills. And that's for a variety of reasons. But number one, we have to think about the fact that if they're identifying a problem in every challenge to solve, then they are figuring out that there are problems that are out there, and they're identifying them, and they're specific to themselves and the broader community. So it's giving them an awareness that, there are things that are issues that exist, but we can solve them if we work together to plan to solve them. They practice working with others. They practice empathy and respect. They work in a collaborative setting. Everybody has a viewpoint. Everybody has opinions, and it's important to listen to each other and be respectful. I think that is a life skill that, is something students absolutely should learn. They learn to manage the viewpoints and preferences of others. We may not agree, but I'm still going to be respectful, and we're going to work together to come to, an agreement on how we should proceed in our design. They participate in a productive struggle. And, if they don't get it, if their design doesn't work, well, they don't say, all right, I'm done. I'm going to try another one. They go back, they identify what didn't work, and then they figure out a way to overcome that hurdle and design it in a manner that will work. And that is productive struggle. So it also helps them to develop that growth mindset, right? They're improving things, they're reinventing things, they're trying again, and they're moving forward. So all of these things are skills that they're learning when they're in a makerspace, and they're creating and they're designing and they're sort of conquering, different tasks and challenges, and really doing so with their own creativity and their own thought process. So let's look at inside the Makerspace. I'm going to show you some examples of what's included in our Makerspace. So with each of them, there is a getting started guide, a teacher guide. There are task cards themselves. I'm going to show you some examples, and then we have the materials. So I'm going to start with the getting started guide. As a teacher, if I receive this cart, I ordered it, I receive it, the first thing I'm going to open is the getting started guide, because it's going to show me how to put it together. So it includes assembly instructions, it includes a list of materials, and it also includes a diagram and instructions for placing the materials and labels in the cart. So we have inserts, I mentioned those briefly earlier. So if we're looking at the classroom cart, each drawer, well, most drawers, not all of them, but the ones that have maybe like the tiny objects, they have an insert. So if we look at this component list, so this is an image of the way that the components are laid out in the Getting Started guide, I can see that drawer D, let me see if I can put a spotlight on this. Okay, so drawer D right here has an insert. It looks like it is a 6-compartment insert. What I'm going to put in that drawer, once I put the insert in, are the beads, both the alphabet and the assorted, the buttons, the feathers, the pom-poms, the wiggly eyes. So that to me seems like a craft drawer. So you notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 of the drawers have slots in them. So all of those little tiny pieces that you receive and that are part of any makerspace, for materials, there's a great way to organize them so they don't get all mixed together. So it's going to lay that out for you and help you put the cart together so that it's grab and go, it's easy to use, students can go right to it and pull what they need. Okay, let me go back to my thing here. Okay. And this is just an example at an upper grade. The variety of materials is really important. And I'm going to give you just a quick scenario. If I have 2 students and I challenge them, they're doing the same task. Maybe their task is to create a greenhouse. I'm going to use that one. If I give student A 3 things to use to create the greenhouse, and I give student B 12 things to use to create the greenhouse, who do you think is going to create the better greenhouse? At the end of the day, the more access that they have to materials, the better their design will be, because they will not be, they won't have to overcome a lack of access to materials and use what they have. They have options, and that just allows them to be more creative and to push the envelope further. So the variety of materials was very intentional. We want to give students access to a lot of different things. They may use things that we would not necessarily think, would work well in a specific challenge, but they find a way to make it work. So the access to an abundance of materials is definitely important. The teacher guide is really going to be for you. It gives you some background information. It does talk about social emotional learning and how you can promote social emotional learning with the Makerspace. It gives you the alignment to the engineering design process. It also gives you an overview of the task cards, which we'll look at in a second. And then there are several Blackline Masters. So the Blackline Masters for Makerspace cards that we have are very general. They can be used and applied to any task that we have, but they're also really important. So Makerspace rules, how do you act in a Makerspace? How do we treat each other in a Makerspace? What are we supposed to be aware of in a Makerspace? Those things. A design plan, and actually I have these that we can look at. So this is the forefront of the teacher guide. So you can see utilizing a Makerspace card to create what is the point? How are you practicing the social emotional learning? What are some teacher tips? And then here's the STEM connection and the task card breakdown. So here are the Blackline Masters. So you see I have the Makerspace rules, there's a couple, and then they can create their own. So you as a class can decide, what's important in a Makerspace, and that gives them some ownership over, how they're behaving and what their guidelines are in working in a Makerspace. The team design plan gives them a guide. If I ask them to design something, but I don't give them any support to do so, will they necessarily know what they're supposed to do to start? Will they know the questions to ask themselves? I think they learn them along the way. I absolutely think if they're doing this regularly that they are less likely to need the Blackline Master. But I also think it gives them the guidance that helps, hone in their creativity a little bit and keep them focused on the end goal instead of just, focused on whatever pops into their head. And then same thing for team test and redesign. Does it work? How well did it work? What changes do you have to make? The other thing that we have available with this is a scoring rubric. And I think I have, yes, okay. This is absolutely one of, if not my favorite piece here, because it helps students see what it is that we are expecting. So I'm just going to go to exceeds the skill. If they are exceeding the skill, that means we're defining success with a makerspace by their ability to cooperate with teammates and advocate for team participation, their ability to generate multiple innovative ideas and design refinements. Are they effectively evaluating the task? Are they reevaluating, and are they demonstrating learning throughout the process? Do they communicate well? Do they listen? Are they fully participating, and are they taking the initiative and the ownership? So again, this is a super inclusive way to learn, right? Because any student, no matter what their learning style is, knows what the expectation is, and it's really more around their ability to collaborate and be creative and to think critically and to communicate and to be responsible. And those are skills that you just can't replace. So I think it's super important that that's what it's focused on, instead of a design that may or may not work, because they're going to design things that don't necessarily work, but it's not about that. How did they work throughout the design process to get to that point? And then they can go back. So I just love putting the emphasis on the process and their ability to work well in a makerspace environment and work well with each other, and to communicate and be respectful and be creative over whether or not their design was effective and did what they wanted it to do. So the task card elements, this is what the task cards look like, and we'll look at a couple in more detail here in just a moment. So they're double-sided, they're big, they are, you know, shiny, they're very, very nice, sturdy task cards. On the front, they have the prompt. So the example that you see here says design and build a game using magnets. Well, that could go in a number of directions, right? So if they flip it over and they go to the back, then it also gives them a tip and a think bigger. So their tip is, before you begin building your game, write out the rules. Probably easier to start with writing out the rules, then you can form the game around the rules. That makes sense. I don't know that I would have necessarily thought of that. And then the think bigger is really pushing the envelope. Honestly, I see the think bigger as a way that you could even, you know, challenge those that are maybe at a higher level and have them take it a little bit further, but it wouldn't necessarily be something everybody would have to try to tackle. But the think bigger is add new rules to your game to make it more challenging, design and build a different type of game. For example, you might design and build a board game, a guessing game, or a card game. So that gives them guidance. It gives them, you know, it helps them generate better ideas, more ideas, or take maybe their design in a different direction. I do have some examples that we'll look at here that are bigger. So these are K5 task cards. So these are two examples that I pulled. Make a paper recycle bin for the classroom and design and build a wind turbine. So I'm going to click here and it's going to flip them over to the back. So for the recycle bin, the tip is to make sure your bin is not too large for the classroom. You want to store the bin there. And then the think bigger is make additional recycling bins for other materials like bottles, cans. They can be used by your class to add materials to the maker cart. For the wind turbine, the tip is the shape and angle of the blades on a wind turbine affect the turbine's power. Think about how you will design the shape and angle of the turbine's blades so it is powerful. And then the think bigger is modify your wind turbine so that it can lift an object off a flat surface. So, you know, earlier I mentioned that Makerspace should to some degree be reinforcing or enriching your curriculum. So, you know, ideally these task cards are being approached at a time where it's relevant. Maybe they just learned about wind turbines, or maybe you just learned about, you know, they learned about waste and the environment, and recycling was part of that. You know, so when we integrate them at a point where they are relevant and applicable to what you're doing in the core instruction, they will have the background knowledge that they need to execute. All the tips do, or the think bigger does, is help them with some key elements that are really important things to think about when they're designing. So it does help them build that background content a little bit if they don't have it or they're confused about something, and I like that guidance. Here are some examples for 6-8. I'm not sure why they're different sizes, but that's okay. So design and build a marble run is one of my favorites. I could just see students going very much, getting very into this, right? So they have to design and build a marble run with at least 2 changes in direction. So the 2 changes in direction definitely throws a curveball in there, because I think most students can build a marble run in one way or another. Building one that changes directions twice, you know, that will give them a little bit more challenge. And then design and build a miniature greenhouse. So let's flip these over. For the marble run, keep in mind that changing the height of the slope will change the speed of the object rolling down it. And then the think bigger is modify your run to include an automatic marble return. I probably have just a handful of students that would be able to tackle that think bigger, but again, it can be an enriching or more, for your challenge students. And the slope and the height of the height of the slope and that changing the speed, that's again a reinforcement. And for the greenhouse, it's just make sure your plants get the sunlight they need to thrive. Think about where the sun rises and sets. Consider how the greenhouse is oriented to the sun's position. And then modify your greenhouse so that windows or part of the roof can be open for venting. So this just gives you a better idea of what the task cards look like. There's a lot of carts out there that have all of the materials but don't have the task cards. So you still have to find the tasks or the challenges on your own. I think that these are a great benefit to have with the cart, because it gives you everything laid out. It gives students the support that they need to execute the tasks, and then some guidance that goes along with that with the Blackline Masters is also really important. So just a couple other things that I'm going to mention. We do have STEM and action modules that are very much, giving a lot of different options for aligning to life, earth, and physical science. And they are STEM work certified and STEM authenticated. So these are available for pre-K5. There are coding modules that are in the STEM and action as well. And it's nice to have a pre-K option. And then we also have the STEM bins, and I'm sure some of you attended Brooke's webinar, I think it was last week or the week before. The STEM bins are a great, not like the maker bin that I mentioned earlier, because they're for multiple students, but they could be modified or adapted, in your classroom to suit more of a one-on-one environment if you needed to use them in that manner. But they have teacher guides, Blackline Master, task cards, manipulatives, and again, a lot of different materials, and she has a lot of great support on her site as well in her blog. So before we do questions and I cover the, announce the giveaway and logistics for receiving the recording and the certificate, I'm just going to do a quick recap here. So the Maker is the open-ended exploration. It fosters creativity and innovation with the engineering design process. The space is a designated area that allows students to design, to build, to tinker. And the cart is the fully loaded turnkey mobile station, and it has activities using a variety of materials. So I am going to answer some questions here. Let me get to that point. And before I do, let me just show you this. So after the webinar today, you will receive a follow-up email, and it will have 2 things. It will have the recording to today's session, and it will have a certificate. You can click on the recording. It will take you to a page to input your info, and then you can watch the recording there. Or if you need the certificate, and it's a basic certificate, it's just a, it has your name, the name of the webinar, the date, and hand2mind. You can turn that into your administrator and see if it'll count for PD credit. We don't determine that, but we do provide a certificate that proves that you attended. If you have any trouble with those, let me know. Definitely let me know, and I will do my best to help you, and I can pull the attendance report if I need to do that. So let's do some questions, and I will turn on my webcam here if I can find the button. Okay, webcam is on. Okay, so how would you go about disinfecting the supplies in your makerspace? So I think the easiest way that I can think of to do this would be to have two different areas in my classroom. So maybe I have, two different buckets or bins, and I have at least one dirty thing. So if a student uses something, and it needs to really go in the dirty bin, and that's something that maybe I'm pulling and disinfecting at every, really at any moment. Maybe it's between periods or something. Because I think the hardest part about keeping up with that is remembering what to disinfect and what not to disinfect. If you can identify those quickly by putting them in a bin, it's much easier to just disinfect the entire bin. I know that we have these mesh bags that will be available at the end of the summer, where you can just put a lot of multiple items in to either put in a dishwasher or just to run in hot soapy water, and then it allows you to wash multiple things at once. So that could also work. But the other supplies, the cardboard, anything that's consumable, students really aren't sharing. So I think if you make sure that they have their own scissors and their own glue, their own art supplies, and they are, the consumable items aren't going back in, they're just getting what they need, then you're really only disinfecting the things that you have to use over and over again, like the tools and things like that. So I think that does make it slightly easier. But that's what I would do. I would definitely have a bin to quickly organize it so that somebody could come in and disinfect multiple times a day. Let me see what else. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of different websites to purchase grants. So one of the websites that I'm going to mention is actually Follett. If you go to Follett's site, Follett, I think library, right? They have an extensive, and I mean extensive, list of every grant and I mean anything that you could apply for, and it's updated. It is probably the most comprehensive list of funding resources I have ever seen. And most of them usually link out. You could also go to, STEM.org. You could go to, there's a lot of Facebook pages that have them. I would also check out the, just Google, ESEA grants for STEM, because they have them. There is a bucket of funding with federal funding that is completely and entirely devoted to STEM or 21st century, and the 21st century Makerspace would apply to that. So there's a lot of extra funding there as well, but I think definitely some good options. And just Google, Google Makerspace grants summer 2020, and a lot of the most recent, grants will come up. And again, there's always something that's open. If you're not finding a lot nationally, just check in your state, because the state level also has their own separate as well. Let me just make sure I'm understanding. Do you have a task card at your Makerspace, or do you have some open times? So for the task card, I would say the task cards, I'm assuming that you mean, are you allowing students to choose the task card, or am I providing it to them? I think that honestly, the best way to do it is because the way that we have our carts organized is you have 70 and 36, right? Or 72 and 36. I don't want to give them access to all 36, but what I would probably do is pull 5 or 10 cards that are relevant, that they would have the background info to complete. And then I would just lay them out, let them choose from a deck of cards, choose the activity that you get, because I think that sometimes they overthink it, right? If we give them too much choice, so just let them randomly pick one. If you pick from, a bunch that they should have the background knowledge for, then it really doesn't matter. It's going to be luck of the draw. I think you can also decide which one they do and have that at the space. Maybe you put the task card under an Elmo, or, somehow project it, because we do have the e-formats as well. And you talk about what the task is, and every group has the same task, and they have to, tackle, each one is doing the same thing and building a different design. You could also do that. So that's how I would do it. And I have seen a lot of teachers have a lot of success with having designated times for Makerspace. So whether it's Monday afternoon, Thursday morning, or it's every week, they have a certain slot where students know they're allowed to go to Makerspace, and it, seems like they're going there to complete an ongoing project or to start a new one, right? So if they started one on Monday and we also have a slot of time that we do it on Friday, then they would pick up where they left off Monday until they complete that. I would probably have them present to each other when they're done before they start another one, but I think that there's some great ways that you can make it fit. Makerspace ideas for the library. These carts can absolutely be in a library. I mean, I think they fit just as well. One of the things, because the STEM is a K-5 cart, I think that probably is a better cart for the library setting. And then you can pull task cards, like by K2 and 3-5 that are appropriate for students who are in the K2 coming into the library during library time. And I think it is a great option for library time. They should be coming to the library pretty consistently, right? At least once a week, maybe bi-weekly. Having that as an option, and maybe it's even something where they have library time where they're coming in to get books, but they also have library time where they're coming in to do Makerspace once a week, and they can do it that way. And I think you also probably have more space in the library to set up some different types of stations within your Makerspace that could almost be rotating. But definitely Google that one too, because there's a lot of really good ideas out there for librarians who are looking to integrate Makerspace. Let's see. So if I were asking third grade students to, maybe I'm asking them to complete maybe I'm asking them to create some sort of let's just use like the soda bottle airplane. If they are being asked to create a soda or a boat, they're being asked to create a boat that will actually float in the water. Then the question that I might put on a Padlet is, let's say for either of them, it might be about the weight, right? What do you think how does the weight of the soda bottle affect its ability to fly? Should you consider the weight of the objects you're using to build this? It's kind of like if they were doing the egg drop and I was doing a Padlet with them, I would want them to think about the choice of materials, right? So I would ask them about what are they trying to do with the egg drop? They're trying to protect the egg, right? So they need to think about cushiony, light materials. So those kind of questions that just help them focus in on choosing the right materials to use in their design without giving them too much information, I think. So hopefully that helps answer your question. You guys have good questions today. Follett, so Follett, F-O-L-L-E, is it E-T-T-E? I hope I didn't spell that incorrectly. Follett is actually a company. And maybe let me see if I can just go out there really quick and show you their list. Follett grant. I'm just going to give this a whirl and maybe, yes, okay. So I'm going to share my screen with you. So I'm going to turn my camera off for just a moment here. So when I Google Follett grant list, I have grants and funding. When I say that this list is super, super comprehensive, it's super, super comprehensive. So whatever it is that you want to look at, each of these, let me find this one. They're PDF. Yep, okay. This is literally just me scrolling through pages and pages and pages of grants. They all have different purposes. So there is a category on this page that is about that. We just scrolled past one that was enrichment. Makerspace would definitely qualify for enrichment. So Google that and when you get there, pull up the downloadable PDF. And actually, let me make this one step easier for you. I'm going to, instead of you all having to go find it, I'm going to drop it into the handout section here so that you can just download it. Let me see if I can get to it. Let's try something. Here we go. Okay, so I'm dropping it into the handout section on your panel, on your webinar panel. If you click on and expand the handout section, it should now be in there. So hopefully you can see that. That is the PDF of the list of grants that Follett has put together. And the last thing that I am going to share with you is that Melissa, I hope I'm saying your name right, San Angelo, I am going to be getting in touch with you because you are the winner for today's task card. So you get to choose task cards of your choice, K2, 3, 5, or 6, 8. So I will reach out to you to see which ones you want and where you would like them shipped. So these are just a set of the cards that you can use with, you know, any materials that you might have available or your students might have available to do some Makerspace challenges. So I hope that you enjoy these, and I will be in touch. I think that is all that I have for you guys today. So let me just, you know, end by saying thank you. I appreciate everybody joining and asking such great questions. It's always nice to, you know, have some communication back and forth. So thank you for participating. We will do 2 more webinars. We'll do one next Tuesday, and then we'll do one at the end of the month in June, and then we will be taking a break. And we will start back again in August with a more grade-banded focused webinar, back to school topics. And we definitely encourage you all to come. If you search hand2mind webinars, the first thing to pop up is our webinar page, so you can check any updates, you know, upcoming events on the calendar and get any recordings on that page as well. So I hope everybody enjoyed today's webinar, and I hope you all have a great summer. If I don't see you on another one, and I hope to see you again on one soon. Thanks, everyone.